Hey Eric, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name's Ed, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come and sit down with me today. As you've seen, I have a banner here, and the banner says, "Veganism is a moral obligation." What do you think about that statement?
The statement caught me off guard, just
Okay.
because I'm not a vegan at all. I almost eat meat like almost every day.
Yeah.
So I just kind of like saw this and I was thinking like, wow, like, this is something. So I want to like talk to you and like kind of see why you're making the statement, because it's not that I don't disagree with it, but I don't agree with it either. So I'm kind of like in the middle ground. So I just kind of want to see like what you have to say about everything.
All right. Well, on what grounds do you disagree with it, and on what grounds do you agree with it?
Well, I guess I've kind of heard how like eating meat over a prolonged period of time is really like bad for your health, and I also think like for the sake of animals too, like just the way that they're treated, I think like that aspect of eating meat is pretty bad. But at the same time, my main thing is just like getting the proper protein and like the essential proteins. And I'm not sure if you go like if you were to go vegan, I'm not sure if you would still be able to get all those essential like amino acids and proteins in your diet.
Well, what do you think? Just straight off the bat, do you think that it is possible to get the protein you need from a plant-based diet?
I off the bat, I think yeah.
Okay. So all you have to do, like you do with meat, is you just have to find the foods that have the amino acids that you want. Now, of course, meat has all the essential amino acids because it's flesh, but there are also plant foods that also have all the essential amino acids, and there are also, plant foods that have high, amino acids of different profiles, and when you combine them, you get them all anyway. So your first instinct is correct, because it is possible. Okay, let's move past that point. Then we spoke about the treatment of animals. What is it about the treatment of animals that is a moral concern, do you think?
Like that's immoral,
that makes it a moral issue.
Yeah,
It's immoral.
I think it's I don't know the exact terminology of it,
Sure.
but the way they kind of like pack all the animals into that one house and then just to get ready to slaughter them, like I feel like that's extremely immoral.
Okay.
Maybe I guess like if you're out in nature, like more in the wild, and there's an animal, and I guess you're very hungry, maybe hunting an animal might be. I don't see anything like wrong with that. I mean, you might disagree with me, but I think that just like if you're just kind of like setting them up in an environment where they're get ready to die, I think that's moral.
Sure.
That's a moral issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think what your opinion is an opinion shared by the majority of people. Factory farming, as we would call it, is immoral. Interestingly, the situation that you described as being moral is a very interesting situation, because you said if you're in the woods and you're starving, then it's moral to hunt and kill an animal. And I agree with you, because in situations of necessity, you could justify killing an animal because you have to survive. But this situation we've just described isn't a situation you or I are in. We're not in the woods, in the wilderness like humans were 100,000 years ago.
Yeah.
We don't have to do it. So what's interesting is you've defined this scenario, the extreme of necessity, as being moral. So what does that mean for everything else? What does that mean for you and I? Because is it a necessity for you and I to consume animals, being in California with a Target just behind our shoulder, with a vegan restaurant literally just up there? Is it a necessity for you or I?
I don't know. That's a tough question to answer, No, especially when you put it that way. I guess it kind of boils down to what you were talking about earlier. If you can find the proper food items to eat and sustain that diet, then I think that it's like not necessary to eat animal, just meat.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So we've reached a good commonality there where we both agree. So for you, I guess it's just a case of maybe just finding those protein sources and then going, oh, actually, yeah, I can do it just like Ed said I could. Right. So now let's take this a little bit further, because this is where it starts to get really interesting for me. We define something like factory farming as being wrong because we're crowding animals into a certain environment, and we're putting them in these slaughterhouses in groups and just breeding them to kill them. Okay. Why is that morally wrong? Why is it morally wrong to put animals in environments such as the ones we just described together?
Because I think you're kind of just like setting them up for to die. You're kind of like torturing them too. Like think about the actual living conditions they're in.
Yeah.
Imagine if we were all in this like really tight packed room, and it just like me and you are close to each other, and then everyone here is like in a radius of what, like this like one square, and it just that's how we're living every day. And I feel like that in itself is very immoral.
Right.
And then maybe the animals realize, maybe they don't, but eventually they kind of like take an animal, probably go slaughter them, and it's just like you're thinking to yourself like, oh, I'm probably gonna be next. I mean, we don't know. The animals could be thinking that. I think that aspect of it is definitely a moral issue.
Sure. Okay, so now let's because you used the situation of you and I. Now you and I, we're not being crowded together. You know, we have a little bit more space, maybe like we do now, right? We know we're not too bad. We have a bit of freedom to move our bodies and stuff. Okay, now you and I are in this environment, but ultimately someone has bred us to kill us, and they're going to take us to a slaughterhouse. Does that now make killing you and I moral because we have a little bit more space?
No, I still think it's immoral.
Okay. So then that brings us down to this other notion of systems of farming outside of factory farming. We recognize that factory farming is wrong for all the reasons we've described. And one of the things we did is put ourselves in their position. That's what you did. We've now put ourselves in a position where we're not factory farmed, and we have a little bit more room. But the end result is still the same for us. And you and I said that wouldn't make it justifiable. So is that situation now justifiable for the other animals if they're raised in a better environment, but still an environment that exploits them and ultimately takes them to the same place?
I guess if I want to follow through the logic, then I would say that's not moral as well.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So now what we've established is that all the systems of animal farming that we can support for our purchases are not moral. And the situation where we both agreed it could be moral is a situation you and I are not in.
Yeah.
So then it becomes a question of, well, how do we, you and I, morally justify continuing to consume animal products when we've recognized that the situation where it's moral doesn't exist for us, and all the situations where it does happen are not moral in our eyes? How do we morally justify contributing and paying for those systems?
I think the fact that it's so readily available, like it's like literally right in front of us. I mean, you said there's like a Target right here. I'm sure they have like all the different meats, and
also all the different plants.
That's true. So I guess it is your choice. You do have the option to do that, but I think maybe it's also just the way that, like, for me personally, I've been raised just, just eating meat, definitely like that. And I don't even think twice about it. I just go and I eat. And I think that's probably the main reason, just like the way you're brought up with it.
100% right. You've touched on one of the most important points here, which is that for us, our morals are so much assigned by our cultures, by our traditions, and by the way that we're raised. And, unfortunately, from my perspective, of course, when we look at cultures all around the world, there are only a few where meat isn't consumed. But even then, they still consume dairy. So from my perspective, when I look at cultures around the world, I go, well, every culture raises people to think that eating animal products is moral. Indeed, mine did. From Britain, where I am, I ate meat, dairy, and eggs for 2 decades, the first 2 decades of my life. So I was raised in that environment as well, those cultural environments. But here's the next question then. Should culture dictate our morality? Undeniably, culture does influence our morality, but should culture dictate our morality?
That's like, I feel like that's like a existential question. It comes down to some point of that, because I guess you could say culture is kind of like more the nurture aspect of things, but like the way that you're raised kind of like plays with your moral code. But I personally think that there's something beyond culture that's found in every human, and possibly maybe in every conscious being too, that there is like a moral code that we should be following. And
what's your moral code then?
I mean, I'm still trying to figure it out myself too, but I guess just maybe being righteous, just being
what constitutes being righteous in your eyes?
I guess just kind of like being kind to others, and basically trying to help people as much as possible, and like instead of bringing people down, helping people get up.
Yep,
so I think that like people can, it's not only humans, I guess we could look at animals too, like we don't want them to be put in immoral situations, and to try to find ways that could bring them up too. So
does your culture, you said kindness, which is a great word, so your moral code is we should be kind to humans, which I'm really happy that we both agree on that as well, right? Great. Does your moral code also align with being kind to animals, non-human animals?
I think I say this yes right now, but reflecting on my habits, like I eat meat a lot, so I feel like it's kind of like a hypocritical statement, but I think that maybe like I'll try to, I want to be kind to animals, I guess you could say.
Okay, so next question then, is what we do to animals kind?
No.
So this is what I realized about myself, that my morality about animals contradicted my behaviors. So whilst I said I want to be kind to animals and animal cruelty is wrong, I then paid for animal cruelty to happen. And I used the word cruelty to define the standard practices, because the word cruel, or to be cruel to someone, is to do something to them that causes them harm, which is A, non-consensual, of course, but also B, unnecessary. If I'm a cruel person, I go out of my way to cause harm to someone else for an unnecessary reason. So animal cruelty isn't just a matter of stomping on an animal. It's not just when a farmer does something that's exceptionally bad. It's the standard practices as well, because the standard practices are not only unnecessary, but they cause harm to the individual animals, which by my definition of cruelty, it is. So if I say I'm against animal cruelty, but I'm supporting a system that even if it is legal, I still acknowledge as being cruel to animals, then there is a contradiction there. And is that something that you would agree with or disagree?
I think you described it better than I did, but that's kind of like my situation right now, I guess I would say.
So your situation right now. So with your situation right now, what happens for you from this point? What do you think that you would be inclined to do?
I think that I just kind of have to I feel like I definitely have to make some form of change.
Okay.
Just be more conscious of the things that I eat, the products that I'm buying, like especially the food ones. I guess I'll tell you from now, there's no way I could stop eating meat cold turkey, but I think what I'll try to do is slowly gather it more and more. But eventually, with you, I'm sure you've been vegan for a while now, and having a booth like this brings awareness to people too. So
hopefully.
It's kind of it did to me, I guess you could say. So maybe just the first step is to fix myself, and then the next step will kind of be to inspire others. Potentially.
Let me leave you with this final point then, okay?
Sure.
So, obviously, what happens now when you leave this table as an autonomous individual with the choices that you have, you can make the decision that you want to in your own personal life. And even though I'd love to make you eat tofu every day, I couldn't do it even right now. And of course, I wouldn't want you to do that. But here's the question. Whilst we may think that the reduction process is a positive process because it helps us get to where we want to be, and that can absolutely be true. But here's the little thing. When we go for that process of going, first I'm going to do this, second I'm going to do this, third I'm going to do this, the important part of that process is accountability. Now, we've spoken about mass animal farming, we've spoken about the industrialized process, we've spoken about how that's wrong. We've even spoken about how other systems of farming still contribute essentially to the same moral concerns that we have, albeit slightly differently, but essentially the same moral concerns that we have. So then when we go through this process of reducing, and I'm not saying that, I'm not criticizing what you said, but I just think there's something interesting to note here. We recognize something's morally wrong. Now, the system of farming is terrible. And it's terrible partly because of the mass production of animals. But let's say we eat one chicken, just one chicken, and we eat one chicken every month. For that one chicken, what they go through and the individual subjective experience that they have of the process of being farmed and ultimately slaughtered that suffering isn't alleviated. That process to them isn't alleviated simply because we haven't then eaten 9 other chickens in that same month. So the thing that we have to hold ourselves to is accountability. We have to say, I recognize that at the end, my moral code is leading me down this path where the notion of not causing suffering to animals, i.e., taking that stance to be vegan, be vegan, is the end goal here. So each step of the way there has to be accountability, because we recognize that each step of the way, whilst it may alleviate some suffering, is still contributing to suffering by and large to these individual animals who are enduring that process, regardless of whether or not we're causing less suffering to others during that process. So that's what I think is an important conscious thought process to take along, just to recognize that each step is a positive step, but ultimately for the ones who are still suffering at each step, their suffering still remains. Something to bear in mind at least. Okay, what a pleasure. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I guess you had mentioned accountability. And I want to, if you could further elaborate on that, maybe, what are some actions that could be taken?
Okay, yeah, great. Well, firstly, by accountability, I just mean a sense of personal responsibility, because why I mention that is it can be easy to become complacent. It can be easy to say, oh, well, I've limited my meat consumption. I'm consuming 50% less meat than I used to. I've opted to have oat milk in my coffees now, and but I still eat some cheese. And what can happen in that sense of complacency is we can convince ourselves that we've done quote unquote enough in that scenario. I speak to many people, and they very proudly tell me that I eat less meat than I used to, and I go, that's brilliant, because I genuinely believe that. But ultimately, just because we've reduced doesn't mean we're still not contributing to the same problems that we've discussed. So when I say accountability, it's that notion that we shouldn't become complacent in our decision making, that we shouldn't kind of fall into the trap of going, well, because I've taken this step, that's the compromise I need to make, because ultimately for those who are still suffering with that compromise, that doesn't make much difference to them. So that's what I mean by accountability. Certain ways we can do that is to set deadlines for ourselves. Another way we can do that is to say, well, actually, rather than setting this deadline of going, this week I eat this week I remove this week I remove that, we go, I'm going to take it one day at a time. So for the rest of the day, I'm going to choose plant-based food. Tomorrow, I'm going to choose plant-based food. The next day, I'm going to choose plant-based food. And rather saying, right, from this moment on, I'm vegan, you go, well, from this moment on, I'm choosing plant-based food today. And you do that each day. And over time, it becomes easier and easier because you're taking it day by day.
Yeah.
Now on day 5, you might slip up and your friend might buy you a coffee, or you might see something in the canteen, you might give in to those cravings. But the important thing is you don't then stop. You go, right, I've had that, now I continue. And over time, it becomes easier because you're challenging yourself and assigning new norms. And those new norms become habits. So that's what I would always recommend. It's not about going cold turkey, it's about taking it day by day. Of course that means going cold turkey, but psychologically speaking, it's more palatable to go day by day than it is to say, well, from this moment on I've gone cold turkey. So that's what I mean by accountability, by doing what we can and holding ourselves to the responsibility of pushing ourselves to do what we can. And one way we can do that is by watching footage, seeing what happens to the animals. So when we're in a situation where we have the option to buy their flesh or their secretions, we know what we're paying for when we do that. That's the important thing, to connect the victim with the action. This is a chicken breast. This is what happens to chickens. I've watched this. This is a piece of cheese. This is what happens to dairy cows. I've watched this. And you go, that's morally wrong. I'm going to put that down and pick up something else instead.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it more than you know. So have a great day.
All right. Any chance, is there you guys have a club on campus?
We do. Tritons for veganism.
All right.
Tritons for animals.
Tritons for animals. Okay.
And yeah, check it out. Have a great day, Eric.
Thank you. You too.
Awesome.